find a document published by the Presbyterian Church of the USA unsettling. The name of that document is Zionism Unsettled. Here to discuss his concerns, Rabbi Gilbert Rosenthal of the National Council of Synagogues. Rabbi, we thank you very much for joining us today here on America's Forum.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, Rabbi, what concerns you most about this document entitled Zionism Unsettled?
Well, first of all, this is part of what we see as a 12-year campaign to delegitimize the State of Israel and to call Zionism racism and an outrageous behavior on the part of the Jewish people who've created the State of Israel. For example, the Presbyterian Church has been calling for about 12 years for a boycott, divestment, and sanctions against the State of Israel, which is described as an oppressor of the Palestinian people, an apartheid state a la South Africa. Why is the reaction in the Jewish community so vehement? First, it conjures up the idea of boycott, which we recall the Nazis instituted in Germany in 1933 when they took over the country and boycotted Jewish businesses and professions. Second, it enhances in 1948, the birth of the state, in an attempt to economically strangle the state. But more, there's hypocrisy here and a double standard. There's no call on the part of the Presbyterian Church for boycotting nations that maltreat Christians.
Are you still there?
I think we're having some...
Where Christians are murdered. And
Rabbi, your patience is greatly appreciated. We're having a little bit of difficulty with the audio from our transmission this morning, but it sounds as if, as you are laying this out, this is more than a scholarly treatise or a theological disagreement. This is a political take, you seem to be suggesting, by the Presbyterian Church USA. Would you go so far as to call it hostile to the Jewish community at large and internationally?
I would say absolutely hostile and shameful. The document itself, which is called Zionism Unsettled, we view as an anti-Zionist, anti-Jewish, anti-Israel screed. And 1,700 rabbis and cantors of all stripes have signed a document denouncing it. It's a miracle to get 1,700 rabbis and cantors together on anything. On this, they were united. For example, let me give you a few quotes. Zionism is the problem. Zionism is a false theology, a heretical doctrine.
We continue to have difficulties, at least on our anchor desk, hearing the rabbi. We're going to work to reestablish the audio contact. And Rabbi, we appreciate your patience. We very much want to get this story, and as soon as our technical folks tell us that we have this audio reestablished, we will get back to the good rabbi.
Yeah, because he had a lot of good things to say. We know he was very passionate about it, so
and
hopefully we can get that resolved.
What often happens amidst headlines is the notion that people say, oh, okay, here's a doctrinal dispute, or here's something that's theological in nature. Rabbi was making it very clear, Rabbi Rosenthal was making it clear that this has to do with an interpretation of geopolitics that you just heard him say, in his estimation, is openly hostile to Judaism. And I thought it was also interesting because we know there can be theological disagreements in many faiths. And when Rabbi Rosenthal said, really, that across Judaism, so many different scholars, rabbis, the ordained community, the lay community, stepping up to register their protest with the Presbyterian Church USA. If we reestablish contact, right, I think one of the questions that will be very interesting to ask is, what has the subsequent contact been with Presbyterian Church USA?
Right. Because
obviously, one of the scriptural admonitions is, come now, let us reason together. And we understand that, for short, PCUSA will be holding its equivalent, and this is not the term, but a form of a general assembly where those within the denomination gather. As I understand it right now, this document, Zionism Unsettled, is really part of the mission assessment and one department within Presbyterian Church USA. but you can see the concerns of the Jewish community as offered
Already
by
thousands
Rabbi
of
Rosenthal.
signatures. Yeah, already thousands of signatures. Well, hopefully we can speak with them shortly and get that audio fixed.
There is also news that is of great concern. The site leads that we have from our parent website, Newsmax.com. Obviously, as we were preparing to leave this broadcast yesterday, the news broke of the Benghazi mastermind. But we would also be remiss, something else that really we had hoped to get Rabbi Rosenthal's input on, the news coming from Israel about the kidnapping of 3 Jewish teenagers in the West Bank. One of those teenagers, American by birth, if I'm not mistaken,
That is
Prime
correct.
Minister Netanyahu has spelled this out as Hamas.
Hamas
and
is denouncing that, but yeah.
you continue to see the unsettled situation that continues to beset Israel and what transpires on the West Bank and with the Palestinian Authority and with Hamas and all the changes we have seen proposed to that government and a changing diplomatic stance on the part of the United States. So these are questions that we had hoped to address with Rabbi Rosenthal. Again, we hope to have reestablished the contact, if at all possible, as he checks in today from Boston. Now, a couple of other notes, and it really pertains to this. The United States, and this is not political rhetoric. The United States has enjoyed a special relationship with the State of Israel from its founding in 1948. President Harry Truman's old business partner, Eddie Jacobson of Kansas City, they ran the haberdashery together, and it was Eddie Jacobson who persuaded President Truman to offer the diplomatic recognition of Israel. And now we recognize the fact that we can welcome back in Rabbi Rosenthal. We've reestablished the connection. And Rabbi, we thank you for your patience. We want to revisit this and again point out that this is not a theological dispute. This has strayed into the area of politics and political perception and what you would call historical misrepresentation. So, have you spoken with officials from the Presbyterian Church USA, and what has been their response to the concerns that you've laid out?
I spoke at the General Assembly 2 years ago. I addressed the plenum, and I laid out for them why we're so upset by this behavior. A 12-year campaign to basically delegitimize the State of Israel and to denounce Zionism as racism. I told them that the wonderful relationships that we've developed with the Presbyterian Church are at risk because this is a very important issue to the Jewish people all over the world, not just in the Middle East. I noted that this document, the study document, Zionism Unsettled, is basically an anti-Zionist, anti-Jewish, even anti-Semitic screed. And that's the way I would describe it. Some of the few quotes that are relevant. Zionism is a false theology. Zionism is the problem. It's a heretical doctrine that fosters both political and theological injustice, that promotes death rather than life. It promotes ethnic cleansing and cultural genocide. I mean, these are horrible statements, and they are in the document. It compares the treatment of the Arabs by the Israelis today to the treatment of the Nazis of the Jews back in the 1930s and the 1940s. It's inherently discriminatory. Scarcely a word about Arab terrorism, about blowing up buses and pizza parlors and Passover seders in schools. Scarcely a word about that. It cites blatantly anti-Zionist authors and trashes some of the great Protestant theologians who supported the idea of a Jewish state for the Jewish people, which was so desperately in need of a state of its own, especially in the 1930s and the 1940s. People like Paul Tillich and Krista Stendhal and Reinhold Niebuhr are trashed by the document. It invokes old anti-Semitic tropes and stereotypes. For example, Arabs are crucified daily at checkpoints. That reminds us of the old deicide charge that we used to hear for so many centuries. And it's upsetting to us, terribly upsetting to us.
Rabbi,
and furthermore, the document actually called...
I'm sorry, no, I interrupted you. Go ahead and complete your thought. I'm sorry.
Yes, I want to say that it actually calls for the end of the two-state solution, a Jewish state, Israel, and a Palestinian Arab state. But there should be one state. In other words, it calls for the dissolution and liquidation of a state of over 8 million people for the past 66 years have been fighting against all odds to survive and to
Right.
flourish as they have
Rabbi,
in
my
the most dangerous
apologies.
neighborhood in the world.
My apologies, Rabbi. We're actually running out of time, but real quickly, what do you foresee happening as a result?
I hope that the Presbyterian Church will reject this document and try to set the course once again towards amity and wonderful relations with the Jewish people as it has enjoyed for so many years.
And we will keep an eye on that relationship, and we look forward to having you back, Rabbi Rosenthal. Thank you so much for joining us today on America's Forum. So you heard the good rabbi, his concerns about the Presbyterian Church USA. Your comments encouraged. America's Forum will be right back.